power. Let me say that again because that's really important. At least I think it's really important. And don't forget, everybody has a right to my opinion. If we want to change the outreach profile, we need to be really intentional about giving away power. And I say giving away because if we try to share it, actually what we will do, because of the demographics and because of long-learnt history, is we will keep it to ourselves and ask other people to play our game. And so question number one, what are you doing as deaneries, and what's the National Deanery Network doing in terms of intentionally giving away power to the young? Because let's be honest, in 30 years' time, none of us are going to be here. Sorry if that's a downer to start with. Secondly, let me get a bit more upbeat. I was so encouraged by the enthusiasm I felt in the room when we started talking about mission. I noticed it on Friday evening when Bishop Adrian was with us. He asked the question, which was asked of him, is it about saving the church or saving the world? And there was this kind of frisson in the room of, that's the question we need to be asking. At least that's how I observed it from the back and felt it. Bishop Allison asked, are we praying? Or are we praying in the ways of justice? Just praying. Same question, outward looking. I shared my heart a little bit with you yesterday morning. It seems to me that if we truly want to follow the shepherd, who self-defines as the shepherd who is searching for the lost sheep, then actually the church is only truly alive when we are beyond our walls, searching for those who are least and lonely and lost and cold and lying in a ditch. I come back time and again to that story, because it's such a fundamental story. In fact, I find myself preaching basically on only two gospel parables, which are the parable of the prodigal son and the parable of the lost sheep. Because the parable of the lost sheep is intended to be so ridiculous that people either laugh or cry at it. It is just plain absurd for a shepherd to leave 99 sheep where they are going to be ravaged by wolves and go off searching for one who probably doesn't want to be found. It's probably not actually true, but I like the story that in the first century people told shepherd jokes, much like before we got politically correct we used to tell Irish jokes. They would go down the tavern in the evening and say, do you know how you burn a shepherd's ear? To which the answer is you phone him up when he's ironing. That's the kind of thing said. So when Jesus says, I've got this story about a shepherd, people are already on the edge of their seats. They're already expecting something funny. And Jesus says, okay, so he's got 100 sheep, he loses one of them. And a smart aleck in the corner, who's already had 2 pints of Nazareth gold, says, I know what's happened. And Jesus says, don't spoil the story, mate. He says, no, I'm going to tell you he's going to leave the 99 and go searching for the one, isn't he? And everyone's laughing. And Jesus says, exactly, and that's the kind of God that we've got. And as resources get tighter, the pressure on us, particularly at a deanery level, I want to say, becomes to gather ever closer and moan about how difficult it is, rather than to say, where's the shepherd and let's get with him. So be encouraged at the energy and live with it. I said I preached about two parables. The other one I often preach about is the prodigal son. Not so much the story of the prodigal son, although that's really, really important, but to ask the very simple question, what do you suppose happened the morning after the prodigal son returned? And I know in the first century the party would have gone on for a week, but just imagine they're polite British. So they had port at 11:30 and went to bed. What do you imagine happened the morning after? Because as a church, I'll tell you what I think we live by way of story. I think we live jolly good polite party, applause and everything. Everyone went to bed, and then at 6 a.m. the next morning, the father goes up to the son's room and he's like, "Oh, you horrible, get out of bed. You need to work now and earn the money back that you've lost me. It was a party last night, but the next 400 years of your life are going to be hard labor, and there are going to be no resources to do it. More tithe, more giving, more effort. And by the way, you're too old." Maybe it's not where you are. But it's the story I feel like I've imbibed from the church, not just the Church of England. I grew up Baptist too. And that seems to me so profoundly out of kilter with the God that we see in the scriptures that we need to challenge ourselves. I'll tell you what I think happened the following morning. I think sometime probably early, at least by the son's body clock, the father did go and knock on the son's door. And I think in his hand he had 2 mugs of steaming coffee. And I think, and I say this as the father of two teenagers, he probably pushed the door open to that kind of that teenagers manage in the morning, and was momentarily recoiled by the odour that came forth from the room. But the extraordinary power of his love quashed his almost physical reaction as he made his way through what appeared to be 17 weeks' worth of strewn clothing, despite the fact the son had only been home for one night. And I think he sat down on the side of the bed with the mugs of coffee on the bedside table. And I think he said something like, "Son, I hope I've got it like you like it. I don't know if your tastes have changed. But if they have, let me know. Because it's time that you got up and you and I came out to work together. I've got some of my work clothes for you." And I think the son might have groaned, but I think he probably went. And I have this vision, not quite literally, but almost, of the father and the son digging holes through stony ground and saying slightly naughty words when they drop rocks on their toes, and laughing and crying and breaking their fingernails and pausing to drink coffee and eat. Well, they wouldn't have been bacon sandwiches, would they? But in my version, they are. And I have this conviction that the glorious liberty of the children of God is not about rest in the sense of not hard working. It's actually about being in the presence of the Father, in whose presence all the hard work looks very different. It's not about saying we live in easy times, because we don't, but rather saying the difficulty of the times we live in belong to the Father. And of course, in that picture of the father and the son working in the field, there's a third character, isn't there? The elder brother. Do you know what the Greek for him is? Presbyteros. It's true. And he looks on profoundly disappointed that the father is back in his work clothes, getting his hands dirty and saying words that the older brother does not really approve of, as the father's shoulder is to the wheel of the farm. I'll leave it with you as a thought. Third thing I've noticed, something about the power of partnership in a separatist age. I confessed to you that I woke yesterday morning not quite sure what I was going to bring to you. But as I woke, I found myself thinking of Winnie the Pooh and that line, "Wherever I am, there's always Pooh," because of the ending of it. Let's go together, says Pooh, says he. Let's go together. And it seems to me this has been a recurring theme, both in the conversations I've heard, but also in what I've heard from the front. As we heard from Citizens UK, we heard this: it's not about what I can do, but what we can do together. And as a diocese which is signed up to Citizens UK, actually as a whole diocese, I have to say that's exactly what I experienced through Citizens. Think about the York definition of the deanery, redefinition of the deanery perhaps, as a local network of churches inspiring, influencing and leading mission and ministry. Have you ever noticed that in Luke 9 and 10, when Jesus sends out the 12 and then the 70, 72 or 77, depending on which version of the text you read, he never sends them out one by one. He sends them out two by two. Because loneliness is really tough in ministry. In fact, after 20 plus years of observing ministry, I would say to you there are two great cancers of ministry, lay and ordained. The first is loneliness, and the second, which sometimes arises as a secondary from the first, is bitterness. And I think you know them when you see them. That sense of debilitating angst that pours out from the individual and swamps all around them. Partnership is key as a gospel value. And what are deaneries if they're not about partnership? But I think there's something even more prophetic about noting that partnership is key to what we're called to in this day and age, because we live in a profoundly separatist age. Think Brexit, whichever side of that debate that you're on. Even if you are pro-Brexit, I would be immensely surprised if you were not as worried as I am about the separatism that comes with much of the rhetoric around the Brexit debate. Now, please, it might be right to leave Europe, but some of the things that are said in order to encourage us to leave are surely not right. They are surely not gracious. They are surely not godly or wise or kind or reflecting the heart of Christ, whether or not we think it's right that we should be in Europe or out of it. Listen to the rhetoric that comes from